The mayor of New York City and New York governor voiced alarm after the US Supreme Court struck down the state's restrictions on carrying concealed handguns in public, saying more people will now be toting firearms and everyone will be less safe.
We just received some very disturbing news from Washington that the Supreme Court of the United States of America has stripped away the state of New York's right and responsibility to protect its citizens with a decision which we are still digesting, which is frightful in its scope of how they are setting back this nation and our ability to protect our citizens back to the days of our founding fathers. And the language we're reading is shocking. This decision isn't just reckless, it's reprehensible. It's not what New Yorkers want. And we should have the right of determination of what we want to do in terms of our gun laws in our state. If the federal government will not have sweeping laws to protect us, then our states and our governors have a moral responsibility to do what we can and have laws that protect our citizens because of what is going on, the insanity of the gun culture that has now possessed everyone all the way up to even to the Supreme Court. Today, the Supreme Court struck down a New York law that limits who can carry concealed weapons. Does everyone understand what a concealed weapon means? That you have no forewarning, that someone can hide a weapon on them and go into our subways, go into our grocery stores, like stores up in Buffalo, New York, where I'm from, go into a school in Parkland or Uvalde. This could place millions of New Yorkers in harm's way. And this is at a time when we're still mourning the loss of lives, as I just mentioned. The law we're talking about has been in place since the early 1900s. And now to have our ability to determine who is eligible for a concealed carry permit. This is not an ordinary permit. This is a special use that you can hide it from people. We have limitations if it's for a proper cause. Someone who's been threatened, someone who needs it for their job as a security guard. We have classifications where it is allowed and have been allowed for over 100 years. But we do not need people entering our subways, our restaurants, our movie theaters with concealed weapons. We don't need more guns on our streets. We're already dealing with a major gun violence crisis. We don't need to add more fuel to this fire. As governor of the state of New York, my number one priority is to keep New Yorkers safe. But today, the Supreme Court is sending us backwards in our efforts to protect families and prevent gun violence. And it's particularly painful that this came down at this moment. We are still dealing with families in pain from mass shootings that have occurred, the loss of life, their beloved children and grandchildren.
This decision is so impactful. When I spoke with my chief counsel, based on his preliminary analysis, I said, give it to me on a scale of 1 to 10. It's very close to a 10 of a major concern that we have. While we're still analyzing the decision, we can say with certainty, this decision has made every single one of us less safe from gun violence. Nothing has changed. If you have a target permit, that is not a carry permit. And the thought that people may hear this ruling and believe they can openly carry, those who are legally allowed to have a permit of some sort. So we're going to send a very clear message. Number one, nothing has changed. But number two, we're going to continue our pursuit as we have removed over 3,000 illegal guns off our streets. We're going to continue to pursue that. This complicates matters. And if it's implemented, and there's still levels to it, as it was mentioned, but we are going to continue to pursue those who are carrying illegal firearms. Efforts would include a comprehensive review with the Corporation Counsel, our Chief Counsel, and other legal experts to assist us in this matter. As we start to define sensitive locations when carrying a gun is banned, and reviewing our application process to ensure that only those who are fully qualified can obtain a carry license. This is something that the police commissioner who's joining me today will ensure that our licensing division is aware of. We will work together to limit the risk this decision will create once it is implemented, and we cannot allow New York to become the Wild Wild West. The decision ignores the shocking crisis of gun violence every day, engulfing not only New York, but engulfing our entire country. The opinion claims to be based on nation's historical past, but does not account for the reality of today. It ignores the present, and it endangers our future.
So far this year, 693 people have been shot in New York City, according to official statistics that include both fatal and non-fatal shootings, down about 9% from the 765 in the same period last year. New York City Council Speaker proposed state legislation to prohibit firearms within 1,000 feet of sensitive places such as hospitals, parks, and government buildings in high population density areas.
In light of today's ruling by the United States Supreme Court in this case, we cannot idly stand by and just watch our streets be flooded with guns due to more people being permitted to legally carry firearms in public. We must take significant action to protect our city's residents. When New Yorkers are being victimized by gun violence due to the soaring influx of legal and illegal guns, putting them even more firearms into the hands of people in public spaces, that will have dangerous consequences. This is why today the City Council is calling on the state to consider innovative solutions that can protect New Yorkers from the impact of this decision, and is seeking to contribute ideas for our legislative partners in Albany. Our proposed solution encourages the state to tailor a law that accounts for New York City's high population density as a factor in establishing specific parameters for the designation of sensitive areas where legal firearms are prohibited from being carried by members of the public. The ability to designate sensitive areas where citizens are prohibited from carrying concealed firearms is a framework that is still respected by the highest court, and one to be utilized to prioritize public safety. Prohibiting the possession of legal firearms in sensitive facilities such as hospitals and poll sites is not only good for public safety, it's just plain common sense. We intend to put forward legislative ideas for the state in the form of a resolution. We call upon the state to enact legislation that takes into account the unique factors of high-density population as defined by the United States Census when designating sensitive areas. Given the high density that characterizes most of New York City, we need to significantly limit the harm that this court decision could otherwise have in making our streets more reflective of an environment typical of the Wild West, one where concealed gun carrying is the norm all around us. The resolution also urges the state legislation to designate hospitals and medical facilities, parks and parks department facilities, government buildings and facilities, public and private education buildings and facilities, child care facilities, places of worship, cemeteries, financial institutions, theaters, establishments where alcohol is served, libraries, homeless shelters, mass transit systems, and the courts as sensitive areas where legal firearms would be prohibited within 1,000 feet. One of the law reviews cited by the decision included examples of buffer zones around sensitive areas, so we encouraged the state to also include buffer zones in its legislation. I want to be clear that this will not completely solve the problems created by the recent Supreme Court decision, and we're still reviewing that decision. But these ideas are ones to be considered as important potential tools to protect public safety. This council is committed to working closely with our communities, state legislators, the governor, and the mayor to find additional ways to ensure that the recent Supreme Court ruling does not cause additional harm and violence in our communities and our city.
The New York Transit System's General Counsel said the Metropolitan Transportation Authority has begun drafting appropriate rules to keep dangerous weapons out of our subways, buses, and commuter trains. The US Supreme Court struck down as unconstitutional New York State's limits on carrying concealed handguns in public, handing a landmark victory to gun rights advocates in a nation deeply divided over how to address firearms violence.
The only way for things to actually reform and change is if more testing, like, you know what I'm trying to say, like protocols for people to get the guns, if that makes sense. Like, I think there is a need for the Second Amendment, but I think there needs to be more regulations on how and when people get them. And I think why people get nervous is because they're like, oh, more regulations means I won't ever get it. And it's like, no, we're not saying that. We're saying, hey, it's looking like it's getting too easy for the wrong people to get it, so let's just make it a little harder for them. And you're still going to pass. You're still going to get your gun. You're still going to be able to do what you want to do and hold it. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm saying, hey, let's maybe stop 18-year-olds from getting it and move the years up a little bit more. It's like, well, they can get a gun, but they can't drink. Like, you know, like maybe just move the same ages, you know, like things like that. But I don't know. New York tends to rally together when things get enough voices. So hopefully enough voices will speak up.
I think it's dangerous. I mean, I'm a native New Yorker. I always felt safe knowing, I mean, not that they were necessarily hidden, but I just felt safer before. And I don't know, now seeing a gun out, somebody could snatch it out your waist and then shoot people. I mean, it's gonna be chaos.
We have a very serious gun problem. We have an inordinate amount of deaths. No other country does this. It's nuts.
I think they're a little bit deaf to what's going on in the world right now. It used to be that Supreme Court decisions came out and they had people who just thought about what the law was, and it wasn't really divided ideologically. It's kind of scary to think about what's next. I think policing is hard. I think law enforcement's hard. I think having opportunities for people to live together in a city like New York, you have to take certain measures for the safety of others. It's concerning. So it'll be even harder moving forward.
The 6-3 ruling, with the court's conservative justices in the majority and liberal justices in dissent, found that the state's law, enacted in 1913, violated a person's right to keep and bear arms under the US Constitution's Second Amendment. The justices overturned a lower court ruling throwing out a challenge to the law by two gun owners and the New York affiliate of the National Rifle Association, an influential gun rights group closely aligned with Republicans.